What do you have to hold on to when your heritage is lost? I'm a Pākehā and a sixth-generation New Zealander. Like many around me, I'm searching for my own cultural identity. What do I have to be proud of and call my own?
That was an exhilarating situation, but also really frightening because there were 20,000 people around the ground chanting "kill, kill, kill."
I can remember this sea of people just taking up the whole road coming down towards us.
New Zealand hadn't experienced anything like it before.
To say that it wasn't exciting would be, I guess, a little bit dishonest of me, because it was.
In 1981, 2 years before I was born, the Springboks came to New Zealand for a 56-day, 15-match rugby tour. South Africa was still under apartheid rule, but in New Zealand, we considered ourselves a nation of equals.
So the whole culture of the All Blacks really emerged from Gallipoli, the First World War and the Second World War. And from those events, Māori felt that they had an important part to play in the structure and the whole concept of nationhood in New Zealand.
New Zealand, I think, prided itself on being an egalitarian type of society, and I think that the conditions in South Africa were such that they weren't congruent with our thinking in New Zealand.
The most important link that we had with South Africa was in rugby. Rugby was the national sport for white South Africans. It was the national sport for New Zealand, and the keenest rugby clashes for both countries were with each other. So that New Zealand was in a unique position to be able to pressure South Africa. At the time of the tour in 1981, the Prime Minister of New Zealand was Rob Muldoon, and in 1976, under his leadership, the All Blacks went to South Africa and played rugby games in that country while the country was in turmoil. In fact, black school children, 600 of them, were murdered on the streets of South Africa by the police and the army, South African police and army, at the same time as the All Blacks were playing rugby in the stadiums, entertaining white South Africans. 1981 was an election year, and he gambled that if he gave people the tour, they would give him their vote. It was a cynical political move to allow that tour to go ahead.
It wasn't just a few political activists who felt this way. There were the young, old, male and female, professional and tradespeople, clergymen and gang members, people of every culture and creed. But no matter who you talk to and what their opinion, it touched their lives.
My parents had a bit of a bent about their kids going into the military service, and it wasn't something that sort of tickled my fancy particularly, but I had a friend of mine who was first 15 a year ahead of me who had joined the police, and I had some talks with him and he encouraged me to join, so I did.
I was a principal of a small school in West Auckland, and I was married and had one child who was 2.5.
Well, my role was as national organiser of Heart, so in fact most of it was to do with organising leaflets, posters, film evenings, petitions, delegations, all the kinds of things which you do in a democracy to get your point of view heard and get people to listen and understand the issues.
So the group of people that I mixed with considered this issue, and it was part of our of what we thought about, and we tended not just to talk but to act.
When we started out, there was maybe 15% of people opposed to the tour. By the time the Springboks arrived, it was about 50-50 split. So we moved public opinion a great deal.
The whole country was divided, those against and those for, and I was certainly against. But as a journalist, I turned up on my own marae in Gisborne, where the elders were putting on a welcome, and I was one of those quite agitated by the idea of Māori welcoming a Springbok team to New Zealand. But the elders made it very, very clear to me that the place to stop the Springbok tour was at the Prime Minister's desk, not on the marae.
Gisborne was probably a bit of an experiment for police and for road policing staff in those days, because that's where it all sort of started to go wrong. As a result of that, of course, we sort of geared up to handle the various venues around the country, and I was involved here in the Waikato game. Back in those days, I was the senior sergeant down in Tokoroa, and I was brought through along with most of the rural officers who we had working for the Ministry of Transport in those days. And we had to look after the parade part of the protesters.
Special riot squads, named the Red and Blue Squads, were formed especially for the tour. They were trained by the military and issued with new, long batons. These were quickly dubbed Minto bars.
We were given an option of participating or not. My view as a policeman was that law and order has to prevail. For me, the decision was not necessarily easy. I had a young son who was 3 years of age. I was only 23 years of age myself, so I had to make quite a conscious decision as to whether I wanted to do it or not. We'd been to Auckland, we'd done some combined training with the Auckland Team Policing Unit. It got, I guess, more and more intense as we got closer and closer to the Springbok tour. I guess in fairness, no one probably knew the extent or the size of what was going to happen during the Springbok tour.
We'd never really been tested before, put it that way. And I think what happened, of course, is the tour tested many, many resources.
It was here in Auckland's Onslow Street that much of the violence took place. A seismic shift was happening. The majority of the population was standing up in defiance of the government.
There was a small embankment capped off with about a 2-metre wire fence. And what happened, of course, is suddenly all the marchers were coming down that road there, and then a number of protesters, of course, had left the march, and they came along this road here. And, of course, there's nobody there to stop them. And what happened, of course, is they jumped the metre-high embankment and basically pulled the whole fence down. And that's where they actually breached the ground.
We believed that if we had enough people at the right place, we could break into the ground and we could get enough people onto the field to stop the game.
They got on the ground, there was tacks thrown onto the ground and all those sort of things. And next thing a plane came over, and that was just about the end of the game. I don't think many people in New Zealand could believe that we would actually stop the game. But under the circumstances, in hindsight, it was the only thing to do.
So I went round through the crowd with a loud hailer in the middle of the field, and we made sure everybody, I said, look, this is the issue, we're here, it's clearly a very dangerous situation. The police have said that they'll get us off safely if we leave now, and that's a choice that we have to make. Not a single person was going to leave. We were absolutely determined to stay till the game was called off.
After the game, the rugby supporters were pretty anti that the game hadn't gone ahead, of course. And they were quite happy to have a scrap with the pro-tour, with the anti-tour people. And as a result of that, there was a lot of fights around the city afterwards. That's for sure.
Coming out of the park, I was helped out of the park. I was hit over the head with a full can of beer, thrown from one of the stands, and was knocked unconscious and pulled out. We did seek refuge in a house across the street, and there were maybe 15 or 20 people there injured, some of them quite badly, and an ambulance arrived to pick us up from there. But as I was taken out towards the ambulance, there was a big crowd gathered outside, and they closed in, and the ambulance officer said, quick, back in the house, and we skirted around and straight back into the house. We had to wait there for maybe another 40 minutes until the crowd had dispersed, and they were able to take people out and get them to hospital.